I told you we'd get back to theory. The travelogue's done, folks. So, this person is probably one of the most controversial linguists alive today. He seems very interesting. His name is Daniel Everett, and he's written very famous books, which I would highly recommend, called Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, would be the primary one, actually, I would recommend. Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. And there's this wonderful article, wonderful in the sense of I love its title more than anything. It's called The Great Pirahã Brouhaha, because Daniel Everett has made this small group in the Brazilian Amazon, where I have not been. I've crossed the border into Brazil, but this is deep, deep, deep in Brazil, yeah? And this is also frequently what people think of as Amazonia. It's one of the reasons I like to show Western Amazonia so much, because it's both somewhere you can get to from here, but it's also a different type of Amazonia. This is totally flat, just rivers, winding, trees, etc. These people, the Pirahã, speak a language isolate. That means that it's not related to anything. It's not like English is related, more distantly to French, but even more so to like Dutch and German and stuff. Or, it has Latin roots here and there. No. This language? No. Nothing that's alive at the moment. He went in originally as a missionary with the Summer Institute of Linguistics, which is a famous kind of linguistics-driven missionary organization, being sort of placed with this group because it was a notoriously difficult language to learn for outsiders. They didn't really want to use Portuguese as an intermediate, even those who spoke a little bit of it, to help people who can maybe learn Portuguese, right, in a course, as you used to do, and then go off and then at least use Portuguese to ask them, like, how do you say this in Pirahã, blah, blah, blah. No. So he did a lot of monolingual fieldwork, as they call it, where maybe you let something drop, and I say, the beads dropped, and then you go, I know what he's asking, and you say, like, the beads dropped, that kind of thing. You eventually get people to do that somehow, right? And then you can kind of build up the language, take notes. Anyway, he does that, starts a family there, all of this, but the missionization is not going well. He doesn't have a single convert after ages, but ages. And again, this is not a comment on missionization as a practice, but this is just a comment on his personal experience there. He realized that they required a great deal of evidence that he could not provide, like tangible evidence, right? Not faith, not spiritual evidence as such, but tangible evidence. Many Amazonian cultures are very spiritual. This one, that's a point of debate. Many people accuse him of portraying them almost as atheists, whereas they believe in many spirits and things like this. It's a point of controversy, and it's hard because not a lot of people work with them. And so you have a few people as the sources. Anyway, let's put that to one side. What happens is he goes, again, trying to convert these people, blah, blah, and they would ask him questions. He would go, well, Dan, Jesus, was he dark like us or light like you? And being a very honest missionary, Dan said, honestly, I don't know. Like, people depict him lots of, I don't know, honestly. You go, well, Dan, surely you've seen him. And he said, well, I feel like I have a spiritual relationship with him, but no, I've never physically seen him. And they go, huh. They go, but Dan, so surely your father has seen him. No, your grandfather? And you say, no. They go, then why are you telling us about him? And would walk off, just baffled. Because if Dan Everett is right in his depiction of these people, and many people support it, and some people disagree with it, right, with this portrayal, but if he's correct, then they're very, 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 very evidence-centered. And that's something that's very interesting, because Amazonia, as I say, does have a rich spiritual tradition, but there are also many times languages that even the languages require you grammatically. There's a grammatical form called an evidential marker, which shows how you got the information. It's the equivalent of having like a bit on the end of the verb that says, Dan went shopping, I saw, versus Dan went shopping, I heard from somebody. versus Dan went shopping, I suppose, because the car keys aren't there. You see what I mean? And there might even be different grammatical markers in many languages that will tell you that. If it's first-hand visual, first-hand auditory, or second-hand or suppositional information. But this is an extreme version of that. That's saying that the culture itself is radically so. Not just the language and the culture a bit, but radically so. And he ended up becoming an atheist. And again, that's not to say, if you are someone of faith, that's not to say that will happen to you if you go to Amazonia, hardly. However, it's saying that was his personal, development, let's say. He became a career linguist instead of a missionary who used linguistics as a means to missionization. He became a career linguist. But his observations started challenging the core beliefs of language. So someone named Noam Chomsky, who we'll see on the next slide, he is allegedly the father of modern linguistics, revolutionized it when he was an egg. He was like 20 and he started writing a bunch of things, got in with the people at MIT. I'm a linguist, I'm not a Chomskyan, they're called Chomskyans. Basically, he reduced all of language to things like this. So, missing the forest for the trees. These are syntax trees depicting how a sentence is structured. One, I think that's not quite right and it's a bit too simplistic. But it's also, there's no theory of discourse. How do people actually talk? Not just form sentences, but form stories. What I've said to you is not merely a collection of sentences. I'm referring back to things, I'm weaving in and out of ideas, and that's what we would do just in conversation. Our conversations don't really look like this. Anyway, and that's what someone like Dan Everett would say, and that I would agree with. So I'm not here to say I agree with Dan Everett over Chomsky per se. I simply don't agree with Chomsky's theories. It's a very well documented theory, and I find that there are a lot of holes in this. Anyway, many people think so, but no one, and Chomsky actually could be quite personally vindictive. I had a mentor in the Netherlands who was sort of barred from publishing by sort of acolytes almost. It became very culty within linguistics, let's say. So I'm inclined to actually side with someone like Dan Everett. However, that doesn't mean I agree with everything Dan Everett says either. Chomsky basically got really annoyed because Dan Everett said that Pirahã lacks recursion. And in linguistics, recursion is basically if I say, Jane said that Dan said that the snake slithered away. I'm embedding things grammatically one within the other, as opposed to just saying, there was a snake, Jane saw a snake slithered away, and then you put the pieces together by context, right? Those are all separate, they're not embedded in a recursive sort of self-embedding, right, way. So, anyway, some people even debate if that's the best definition of recursion or not, and how much is it logic versus structure, and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of brouhaha about all of it, frankly. But to Chomsky, very important point. That's his bread and butter, and everything else inside that sandwich. That's what he lives and breathes all day, is basically that language has to somehow look like this, right, of these trees. And it has to be very simple in every language. It basically has to have the same structural properties, even if the exact structure changes. Chomsky came up with something called universal grammar, that although grammars manifest themselves in different ways, there's a universal grammar in the mind, in a language organ or language module in the brain, even though we've never discovered such a module in the brain. There's no evidence for it, actually, whatsoever. But he said there has to be, and that's how children acquire language. And Dan Everett saying, okay, half those things you just said, I don't see in the Pirahã. Not this recursion and not certain other properties as well, but mainly recursion. And they've never had a public debate. Apparently Everett's invited him multiple times, Chomsky never wanted to, etc., etc. Some studies have been done backing up Dan Everett's claims about the Pirahã and how unique their language is, but others say, no, Dan's right, but he's wrong that it's unique. Actually, loads of languages work this way. And so now these two are being sort of the straw men, almost,